Hello and welcome and happy Purim. We are so excited to be welcoming you to Esther at the Table, Stories on Food and Feminism. My name is Lisa Apfelberg and I'm the director of Shemayim Jewish Animal Advocacy. And Shemayim is a national Jewish nonprofit organization that teaches the Jewish community about animal advocacy and veganism through our many programs. And one of our favorite things to do is to help the growing Jewish ethical eating community connect with and learn with each other. And events like this one are the ways that we do that. I'm really happy to be partnering with Jewish Veg today to offer you this program. Jewish Veg is a national nonprofit as well that inspires and assists Jews to adopt plant-based diets as an expression of Jewish values. And my co-leader today is Jewish Veg Program Director, Sarah Eisler. I'm going to introduce you to the other panelists that you'll hear from today. Devorah Tucker-Fisk is a fifth-year cantorial and second-year Hashpaha spiritual direction student in the Aleph Ordination Program. She envisions serving through music, chaplaincy, education, and spiritual direction. Devorah and her clergy partner, Rabbi Elizabeth Goldstein, are co-founders of Hineni, an online Jewish community that aims to deepen Torah learning, music, davening, and spiritual practice. Their website is hineni.space. And Devorah is mom to 4 teenagers with partner Jim. They live in a mid-19th century farmhouse in Michigan with 3 dogs, 3 cats, 19 chickens, 8 ducks, and 2 geese. Welcome, Devorah. Carmit Delman is the author of 2 books that explore the intersection of Judaism, feminism, culture, and food. Her first book, Burnt Bread and Chutney, describes growing up Indian and Jewish in America. Her new novel, Consider the Feast, follows her protagonist, Talia, through a decadent quarter of New York City that is filled with indulgent eating. But the haves and the have-nots in this world sit at the edge of a reckoning, and the story is a satire of contemporary food culture. Carmit lives in Israel with her family. Welcome, Carmit. Frances Eames Noland has an MSc from the University of Oxford and is a scholar of LGBTQ and women's rights and global politics and area studies. Frances is a feminist, environmentalist, and an ethical vegan. In addition to her academic career, Frances is a filmmaker and actor and currently serves as an executive producer at John Ennis's The Yard Theater. Welcome, Frances. Now that I've gotten all the introductions out of the way, our Purim celebration is going to start. This program is a year in the making. When Sarah and I first met each other a little over a year ago, we talked about how much we'd love to put on a program someday exploring the connections between veganism and feminism. Because there are so many ties where we see that female animals are used for their body parts in many of the same ways that human females feel exploited for their bodies. We wish to bring this conversation to light and hope that we'd be able to have that dialogue with feminists who haven't yet made the connection to the way we treat animals, especially female ones. When we were discussing what to do for Purim this year, as we thought about Esther, who is the hero of this story, we thought this was the right time to bring this conversation to light. We're so glad that you're here with us, and happy Purim.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So as Lisa shared, I am the program director of Jewish Veg, a national nonprofit that inspires and assists Jews to adopt plant-based diets as an expression of Jewish values. I am also a current rabbinical student, and I am a cisgender queer woman. I've studied feminism and Jewish feminism in a variety of settings. I've also been vegan for about 16 and a half years. So this connection between veganism and feminism is very near and dear to my heart. So like Lisa said, why is it that Purim is the perfect time to explore this connection? So for those who may be less familiar with the holiday, Purim is a time of joy and of celebration. We're encouraged to have fun, to be silly, to dress up in costume, to get drunk. It's like Halloween, but with wine instead of candy. And the reason for all of this celebration is because of Queen Esther, who saved the Jewish people at a time of great danger. So to get us situated, I'll do a quick recap of the Purim story. We're in Persia, or Shushan, and there's this king, Ahasuerus, and he throws a feast. And he's drinking, he's having a good time, and he commands his wife Vashti to come and join the party. And she says no. Well, the king's advisors are horrified, because if the queen can disobey the king, then what's to keep their wives from disobeying them? So they say to the king, "You have got to do something about this." And the king, in a drunken rage, has Vashti either exiled or executed. There's a debate about which. Great guy. So now it's the next day, and the king's got a hangover, and also he needs a wife. So he invites all of the eligible women of the kingdom to come and play bachelor, and of them he chooses Esther. Esther is a Jewish woman who has been raised by her cousin Mordecai after the deaths of her parents. And Mordecai tells her, "Don't tell anyone that you're Jewish, because it could be dangerous." Case in point, the king has an advisor named Haman. And Haman says to the king, "I don't like these Jews. I want your permission to go out and massacre them." And the king goes, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Great guy. So Esther finds out about this through Mordecai. And she knows that if she goes to the king and asks him for a reprieve for her people, it could mean her death. He doesn't know she's Jewish. She's been keeping that a secret. And he's explicitly told her that she is never to interrupt him or come to him unless she's called, upon pain of death. If she keeps quiet, if she keeps her secret and says nothing, she will be safe. But her people will die. Esther is the only person in a position to do anything about this, even though it could very well mean her own death. So what does she do? Esther says, "If I die, then I die," and she goes to the king. She throws a feast. She invites Haman. And at the feast, she tells the king, "This man is trying to kill me and my people." And the king is furious. He rescinds the order to have the Jewish people killed, and he has Haman executed instead. Okay, so where does veganism fit into all of this? Well, in the Talmud, which is basically a collection of rabbis arguing about the Bible, there's this long discussion about the book of Esther. And one of the first questions that the rabbis raise is, what did she eat? Presumably, the Persian court was not kosher. Esther was hiding the fact that she was Jewish, so what did she eat? Well, Rav, one of the rabbis, says that the king gave her the best of everything. And obviously, the best food is Jewish food, so he gave her Jewish food, or kosher food. Well, another rabbi, Shmuel, says, no, actually, he gave her pork, because he thought that she would see that as a delicacy, but of course, pork is not kosher. So Rav is saying, no problem, he gave her kosher food. Shmuel is saying, big problem, he gave her non-kosher food. Well, Rabbi Yochanan then says, here's how we solve this problem. The king gave her zechonim, or pulses, which are legumes, seeds, vegetables. In other words, a plant-based diet. So there are three main things that I want you to take note of here. The first is how quickly the rabbis come to this discussion of what Esther ate, how important that is to them, how central food and food consumption is to our understanding of living a Jewish life. The second is how easy a solution it is to the problem of Esther keeping kosher. All she has to do is eat plant-based, and there is no issue. And why is that? Because every single law of kashrut is a restriction on eating animals and animal products. The laws of kashrut, our central framework of food consumption, are in so many ways a straightforward commentary on how eating animals is spiritually problematic. And the third thing that I want you to notice is how these male rabbis frame the question. What did the king give to Esther to eat? Esther proves in the Purim story that she is brave, that she is committed to her Jewishness and her fellow Jews, that she has agency. And yet the rabbis ask, what was given to her to eat? Not what did she choose to eat? I want us to take a moment to think about what it means to have agency. To have control over what you eat, what you do, what happens to your body. and what happens when our bodies are subject to the power of others. Feminism teaches us to question the systems of power that allow for those assigned a certain social category to have control over those of us marked as others. To do that questioning, we must come to value each of our bodies, each of ourselves, in our own right, as living beings who deserve compassion and respect. When we reduce living bodies to parts and functions, like breasts and birth, we are enacting violence. What happens to animals assigned female on factory farms is gender violence. Forcible impregnation, miserable conditions, wearing down of the body, these are the lot of animals who can give birth and are made to, over and over and over again, without reprieve, without any choice. And for dairy cows, their babies are taken away within 24 hours after birth to become veal or dairy cows themselves, depending on what sex is assigned to them. For egg-laying hens, chicks sexed as male are destroyed as babies, and the overproduction of eggs, a product of the reproductive cycle, just like a period, leads to premature death in every case. What happens to animals on factory farms is gender violence. And it has ramifications on how we see the function of human women, how we talk about sex and gender and the body, how we perpetuate systems that allow for and even encourage misogyny, transphobia, and the often violent devaluing of all bodies. Systems of oppression are always interlinked, and no body is a commodity. Everyone, every living being has value in their own right. That's what feminism teaches us, what veganism teaches us, and what Judaism teaches us. So the rabbis of the Talmud may ask, what was Esther given to eat? But I would ask of us, what are we choosing to eat? The questions that we ask and the stories that we tell can lead us to examine where our courage and our commitment lie, as Queen Esther herself has shown us. We have questions and stories and songs to share with you today about leadership and violence and celebration and survival. And these are only the beginnings of the stories we can tell. It's not only the rabbis who can ask and explore and experiment and create. We all have the agency and the ability. And may we find meaning and may we find joy in all that we create in this world. And with that, I will turn it over to Deborah.
Umi hodeim let kazot higat yadai My name is Devorah, and I am named after, yes, a prophetess and a judge who ruled Israel. Devorah, like Esther, was a leader who stood for what was right. She led her people against tyranny. She was willing to heed the call in tough times. And she, like Esther, was, you guessed it, she was a woman. Now, I have heard many times when people have asked why women like Devorah or Esther were chosen by God to lead. The argument has been made that it was because there were simply no men available. And so the leadership position had to fall to a woman. Umi hodeim let kazot higat Umi hodeim let kazot higat indeed it could be that there were no men who could have served to carry out the demands of this king in this story in the way that Esther, a woman, did. But the Megillah never indicates that the story of how Esther saved the Jews of Shushan was in any way God's plan B. We don't hear of failed leadership by Jewish men before Esther went to the palace. Her uncle Mordecai was never called a weak leader in the Megillah. And in fact, he is seen as a secondary hero, but he's second only to Esther. So I think it's clear that Esther was exactly the right person for the right time. Esther heard the call. And I think in God's mind, Esther was plan A. Umi hodeim let kazot higat. 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 And could it be that she was called for a time such as this? And could it be that she was called for a time such as this? Umi hodeim let kazot higat. Umi hodeim let kazot higat. And could it be that you are called for a time such as this? And could it be that you are called for a time such as this? Yai dai da dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai da dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai da da dai da dai. Yai da 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 da, yai da 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 da, yai da da da, yai da, yai.
Hi. It's good to be with everybody here today. I wanted to reflect a little bit on the Purim story, in particular, because in thinking about it, I've realized that for me as a writer, it's actually been very influential. Unwittingly, I see much of the story within my recent book. And I guess as a child, I was always struck by the Purim story, and especially the opening, which is so grandiose and opulent. These feasts that went on for days with a king who was perpetually drunk. You can kind of picture every sort of food available to him from across the empire, and it was really just sort of the height of hedonism. And as a child, hearing these stories, I think it always kind of seemed so colorful. And of course, there was this strange appearance then, or the expectation of the king that his wife would make an appearance in the midst of this feasting. And it was always sort of a strange tug of war. Was Vashti bad that she didn't come to the feast? Was it her duty to? Was it a purposeful rebellion that she didn't? In the end, she was punished, of course. but she was always sort of a strange figure, very much juxtaposed with Esther, who had a very clear purpose and definition in the story. So I was always very intrigued by the beginning of the story, by Vashti and by the feast, and especially sort of the problem that within all of the opulence that the king had at his disposal, all the foods that were available to him in the world, all of the merriment, all of the guests, all of the festivities, he wanted his wife to appear. And of course, some say, I think, that he wanted her to appear naked. And it was very interesting to think about what the connection was there between all the opportunity, all the availability, all the decadence available. And then on top of that was this, the one thing that was missing was a female body. So that, I think, was probably sort of what tugged at my imagination maybe for many years. And I recently wrote a novel in which I separately wrote about the culture that we live in today, in which food is in some ways a perpetual feast for many people. And just in the story, I really pushed that culture to the next level, trying to figure out like what that would be if it was even more extreme. And so I want to read a little bit of my book in which I deal with a culture that in some ways is as consumed with feasting and with bodies. Okay. So I raced down the stairs and opened the door to leave, but I had only reached the second floor, and instead of an exit, revealed an open space the size of the entire plant floor. It was filled with girls. In one area, girls who had just come into the city, still thin and bony, were being fattened up, force-fed by a matronly woman to drink bowls of lard-filled gruel. In another area, girls who had grown too plump already were being sweated like onions over a heater to melt away the fat. Nearby, other girls were having hairs plucked like feathers, their skins slathered in cream and coconut butter. In other areas, girls were being apprenticed in dance or wine or tea ceremonies. Nearby, I could even see an old Indian lady on the floor, flattening dough with her hands, making chapati. She had a mud cook stove before her, its primitive clay cracked as if this were a village hut, and she was surrounded by a group of girls watching and learning from her so that they could go into the quarter, this area filled with all of the food possibilities in the city, to find jobs making authentic chapati too. This floor was a factory grooming girls to be the bodies of the quarter. So now the quarter is the heart of this city that is filled with decadence. And as I envisioned it, there was sort of a factory in which the women who ran the show of the quarter were processed and plucked and formed in order to be kind of the epitome of what would adorn the feasting that took place in this world. And now that I think about sort of the parallels, I certainly see that there is a connection between the feasting and the extravagance and the societal urge to adorn that, to have the feather on the cap of that be female bodies. It sort of existed in the world that haunted me to create the story, and it certainly existed in the Purim story as we see it. And when I think about kind of the pieces that lie underneath the surface with that, what are the motivations or the emotions? I think that in part there's this underlying entitlement. But I think more than that, in order for this to function, and I think really this exists in sort of all of the ways in which we indulge and violate, there is an objectification that happens, and that is what entitles us to eat or to treat people, animals, to interact with them in ways that are subhuman, that are sort of beneath life. And so this objectification, I think, is really what followed me through writing, and I think also truly follows through the story itself. I can just read a little bit more of the conclusion, not to the entire book, but to this one particular factory of girls that exists in this world. Following one of the girls who has inhabited it, a girl named Angie. Angie pulled the cloudy sheet around her and went down the hall, then down the stairs to the large factory-like room below. The old cook stove in the corner was spewing dungy smoke. Angie went straight to the large containers of ghee and kerosene stored nearby, and gently tipped them one by one in the direction of the fire, walking calmly back out to the hall, even as the liquids poured steadily forward, advancing towards the stove until they ignited. "Fire!" one of the older women screamed, and then all those youth creams and beauty lotions and fatty oils and paints nearby now quickly caught fire too, and the one cracked smoke detector that had actually had some batteries went off. On every floor, they heard the alarm, and young girls in braids poured out of the brothel rooms out into the crowd in the narrow hallway, and old men in the hallways on the top floor, half-dressed, grabbed their wallets and stumbled out still stiff. They padded around with their boxers and wide white calves, irritated, as if it was all just a drill. After all, every empire has thought exactly where it stands is where human history has always been leading to. No one really thought that stragglers over the border, or the cracks in their leaders, or small stirrings of a revolution, or a fire alarm down the hall signaled an existential reckoning. And even after it was clear that the fire was real, the men tried to give orders this way and that, as if by their direction, the fire could be controlled and talked into extinguishing itself. But it could not.
Thank you, Carmine and Devorah. Fabulous. Hi, Francis. Hi, Sarah. So we are now going to have a panel discussion, and the question that we have posed to you is, how do your food and feminist ethics overlap? And so whoever wants to start, please start, and we will discuss this issue.
And I also want to ask our audience, please share your thoughts with us. This is an interactive panel. If you want to answer this question, if you want to comment on what our panelists say, or if you have questions for us, please put those in the comments. We do see them here, and we would be happy to interact with you during this time.
Thank you. Yes. So the question again is, how do your food and feminist ethics overlap? Okay, I'll just call on someone. Devorah.
I was about to go anyway, so I think that worked out. Well, I'm a mother, and I have 4 kids, and so it matters to me that my children are making decisions that are ethical in their lives. And so in my home, I have children who eat things that I don't eat, and it's been a process over time in our home. And so I don't force anything, but my feeling on it is that if I can show them by example and talk to them gently about it, my experience has been that they begin to make different decisions. And so that's where I'm at with it as a mother. And as a seminary student and future, hopefully, God willing, Jewish leader in our community, I also am aware that what I do is an example of the way to live and eat and treat others. And I'm also aware that I think that this issue has not come up as much in our history of leadership, because for the most part, men have not experienced historically the type of exploitation that women have. But now that women are entering into clergy roles and are in clergy roles more and more, this idea of exploitation of not only women, but a similar and sometimes exactly the same exploitation of animals, and female animals specifically, is also a really big concern. And we need to be making choices that reflect our values as Jewish people and as especially Jewish leadership. So, Dibarti.
Shamati.
Shamati, we heard you.
I think that's so interesting, Gar, the insights of the mother in this. I certainly feel for myself that well, especially in these crazy times, but food is 100% of the conversation, 100% of the time, especially these days. And so I do always feel as though that's something I'm talking about and modeling, and sort of helping my children to process on a daily basis, even as they sort of work through, the influences that are around them, and the temptations that are around them. I think for me, probably one of the most dominant pieces that I think about, as I mentioned in my reading, but even generally, is this idea of objectification with both food choices and feminism. And I guess in part, I think one of the reasons why I write is because it has the potential. Writing has the potential to bring to life something that was previously anonymous, previously just an object. I mean, I've done that in writing about, about multiculturalism, because I think that, when you can see a textured personality with all the wrinkles up close, you're able to understand the commonalities, the universality that exists. And so too with both food and feminism, I feel that is just sort of taking away any element of the mere object, and bringing both the food that we eat to life, and so that we can examine it up close with all of the ramifications, and also sort of who we are as women, as individuals, and our history, and how we sort of function as individuals. That helps to kind of dissipate the objectification that I think is just so toxic and rampant, and which somehow frees society to enact upon us. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Devorah and Carmit. I really appreciate both of your perspectives. They're so enlightening. I think for me, I have a twofold obligation to my feminist and ethical food ethics. So I, as a lesbian, genderqueer woman with an X in it, because we don't need men to spell women, I feel that I have more than just an obligation to myself, but I have an obligation to my future partners to kind of stand up for our historically oppressed genders of women, genderqueer folks, trans folks, non-binary folks, because anyone who is perceived outside of heterosexual masculinity is devalued. And so I know that my salary is devalued, and my future wife or spouse's salary will also be devalued as well. And our place within society will be devalued, and our bodies are devalued. And I know we'll have to worry more about our safety when we leave the home, or when we walk late at night, more than a heterosexual couple or a heterosexual male by himself would have to worry about. So kind of having that obligation for not only myself, but for partners, and for my mother and my grandmother and my aunts and my cousins and my future children. I have this big obligation to carry us all to a better future. And I have that obligation for the animals. So female-bodied animals are just discarded as if they're garbage. And we are all beautiful living beings. None of us are garbage. We each deserve to be here just as much as the other. And our tradition teaches us that God gave us this responsibility to take care of all beings. And so when we don't observe veganism as part of our kashrut practices, we're letting God down, we're letting each other down, we're letting our earth down, we're not doing our job that we were given. So I think that our future should be vegan for everyone, but everyone has a journey to get there, and we're all going back to our Eden.
I love the way you just phrased that. That was beautiful. And I really, as a queer woman myself, I really resonate with, your sharing of how important this is for our partners and our families. And I think that's kind of what everyone's been sharing today. This sense that, it's not just us, it's not just our own lives. And I think this pandemic is a perfect example of how our food choices impact everyone at all times. This is a zoonotic pandemic that we are still facing a year later. And what happens when, the next one comes from a factory farm? We have to be thinking about what is our responsibility as stewards of the earth, as we were created, like you said, Frances, in the Garden of Eden, and about, objectification of bodies, as Carmit was sharing. How much do we want to be part of that system, and how does that affect us, and how does that affect everyone else? So I just really appreciate what everyone has shared today. And I want to ask again, if anyone who's watching wants to share your thoughts on this issue, or if you have other questions, please feel free to share those.
Definitely, I was going to mention that as well. And I was going to share that I feel very resonant with what Carmit and Devorah shared. When people somehow, some people erroneously believe that animals don't have feelings or aren't sentient, there's nothing more capable of disproving or dispelling that myth as when you see a baby animal being removed from the mother animal, as a way to just show how much they feel and they suffer the same way we do. And so I think, as a mother myself as well, that has been so resonant for me. And that's something I just wish I could show, all the other mothers and women out there who understand, the power of that connection, but maybe haven't attributed it to the pain and suffering that animals go through. So I really appreciated you both bringing that up, because it reminded me kind of my drive in all this.
Absolutely.
And I want to just highlight quickly, Gail has asked if the link will be available for sharing. Yes, it will. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, the video will remain in those places. But I just want to say thank you for your inclination to share. Please do feel free to share this with anyone and everyone. We'd love more people to see it, but especially sharing with the sisterhood. Thank you, Gail, for that. And I also want to share Raquella, her comment, as women, the overlap is one that I feel comes naturally to us as women. As women, we are innately strong, courageous, caring, and compassionate. Veganism for me is simply the daily practice of my true feminine self as I was created to be, which is really beautiful. Thank you so much, Raquella, for sharing that.
And I also appreciate your wanting to share with your sisterhoods. As I said, this program was kind of a year in the making. And I know that now, once we've gotten the ball rolling, we're going to want to do more programs like this. And we would love to connect with your sisterhoods and your women's groups and your other Jewish feminist groups who may not be connecting animals with issues of feminism. So we would love to expand it and continue these types of conversations.
I definitely think it's so important to make these connections within our sisterhoods too, because that's where we can make the most difference when we as women and historically underrepresented genders come together as a group and a collective to make change. That's how we can really change the world in this way that we see.
I also think that as women who have historically been the owners of the food domain, we in some ways have more of a platform to speak to these issues in a way that will resonate. And obviously, things are changing in terms of how the domain itself is defined, but because this has just historically been defining of women. I think it's impossible to pull them apart. And so I suppose, we're in a position to utilize that to benefit the larger sphere.
Yeah.
That's a good point about, food often being the women's domain, and how we do have the power to make a statement in what we buy and what we cook.
You do have power as an individual consumer, and if you make the best food and you go vegan, people will still want to eat your food. My mom actually is a baker, and she switched her own independent baking business to be vegan, and nobody noticed the difference. And people, in fact, liked it more. Even people that dislike veganism and the concept of overall veganism. And then we told them later, and they were like, no, how can it, but it's so good. But I'm always like, yes, it's very good because it doesn't have any like pus or blood or like corpses in it. Isn't that wonderful? That it doesn't have any of those terrible things, or chicken periods. Like those, when you think about it, those do not sound appetizing to put in a cake. So I think if you go vegan, your friends will be okay with it, and they may even follow you. So you may end up making a vegan buddy.
I think that's a really important point about the value of role modeling. And, Queen Esther as a role model of someone who was facing a really, very dangerous, very, a moment that was really out of her control. And the choice that she made to be courageous. We have one question that I want to get to, and then we will move on with the program. But I really do want to highlight this from Orchid. She says, I tend to be quiet and gentle about my veganism, and I wonder when the time is to come forward strategically. And this discussion on Esther is helpful, that it's okay to be somewhat hidden until the correct time. But when you bring up the pandemic and how this could have been prevented by worldwide veganism, I have more questions within myself of how open to be about my choices. Any comment on that?
I'll start. I mean, I kind of come and go. I mean, at this point, I run a Jewish vegan organization, so I'm pretty out there about my veganism, but I definitely do have times where I pick and choose. And I know for me, I've found that the best way of just encouraging people and connecting with them is by cooking together or inviting people over. I mean, it doesn't happen as much right now due to the pandemic, but prior to that, I always had friends over for my birthday, and I'd invite a vegan chef, and we would just make the stuff they like to make and show them, like, you can make waffles for your family, but just without the eggs that are traditionally in them. So just really role modeling and eating together. And inevitably, wherever I go, if it's a potluck or even a conference meal, my food always looks the best, whether it's something we make, or if you're at a conference and they serve some gross, sort of standard, whatever chicken dish. And then the vegan dish is often this beautiful veggies, really healthy and beautiful to get you through the day. And everyone always was like, could I have that meal too? So I think that value of role modeling that Francis and Sarah were talking about is really one that works well.
Lisa, I agree with you. I think actually for me, coming out with the way that I have been called to eat is something that is easiest when I do it in a way that is about sharing what it is that I created, and to bring really, really tasty food to people and be really excited about it. So often I think people think of plant-based, whole food, plant-based and vegan food as, the cardboard type of thing. And it's surprising to people when you bring them food and you share that it's completely plant-based and it tastes really good and you're really excited about eating it as well. And I've seen people completely open up by approaching it that way. And also, I think a lot of times people think they're going to really have to give up things that they love. And so then what we can also demonstrate by sharing our really tasty food is that it's not about giving up things you love. It's about learning how to create them in a different way. And that exploration can actually be really fun and exciting as well. But a lot of it has to do with our attitude when we present this to people.
For sure. Agreed.
Which is a beautiful point to be making in the month of Adar as we come to Purim, a time of joy and celebration. I would also love to encourage everyone who is interested in the pandemic issue to check out pandemicfree.org. Jewish Veg, partnering with Shemayim and other organizations, is running a campaign on this currently, pandemicfree.org. And I want to turn it over now to Frances to share a story with us.
Hi everyone, my name's Frances, and when I think of the Purim story, I think of Queen Esther and her hiddenness. What do I mean by that? So, within the Purim story, Esther effectively lived as a hidden Jew for a long time, and she was able to hide this through her vegetarianism and through her clever kind of wit. So, it takes a lot to live very hidden. And my family actually has had this firsthand. So my great-great-grandmother was also a hidden Jew. Her name was Julia. And she hid her Jewishness to escape the pogroms and immigrated to Ireland and then immigrated to the United States. Now, our family ended up living in our hiddenness for so long that we were non-practicing Jews for generations in my specific family line. And I'm the first religious Jew in decades, even probably a century since my great-great-grandmother Julia. So I'm the first one that was able to emerge from this hiddenness. But I grew up with a different kind of hiddenness that probably a lot of other people might not even realize they're experiencing, which is being a hidden vegan. So being a hidden vegan, I've heard that we are all blocked vegetarians, and I'd like to switch that term to vegans. So we're all living as a blocked plant-based vegan person. And maybe we don't understand why anyone would be vegan, but we've heard of it. And maybe we might feel like we'd like to try it, but we might be scared. It is scary to think that you might have to give up some of your favorite foods. But growing up, I know both my mother and I were definitely blocked vegans. We were hidden vegans. My mother would stuff meat in the cushions of the banquette. I would go and quickly run and throw it away when no one was looking. I'd pretend I ate some and be like, But I was receiving signs which were telling me that I needed to be vegan, that I shouldn't be eating meat, I shouldn't be eating dairy. Since a young age, I've been very, very allergic to dairy, where my throat would swell up and I would get sick a lot because of that. And once I discovered that when I was about 4 years old, I stopped drinking milk because my doctor had said to my mother, milk is wonderful for baby cows. It's not wonderful for children. Just, she doesn't need it. She's allergic to it. So that I see as a sign from God telling me, hey, you're supposed to be a vegan, which I didn't see at the time, but I just kind of was like, well, I'm not supposed to eat milk. And whenever I would eat meat as a child, which was never by choice, it was sort of like, here, you have to eat this. My stomach would always feel sick and I would feel sad and terrible. And I just felt so much guilt. So I would eat tofu. That was my favorite food, and bok choy and rice and all kinds of veggies. As a child, I loved vegetables. And so I knew that this was the path for me when I grew up. So as soon as I was able to, when I was 21, I had, for a year before, had been secretly being a hidden vegan, not telling my parents. God forbid, they wouldn't accept it. Oh my goodness. I'd been told, whatever you do, don't become a vegan. You can't become a vegan. It's not healthy. And then I told my parents, I'm a vegan. And you know what my mom said? She said, I want to be one too. So together we went vegan. We came out of our hiddenness and into the world, just as Esther came out of her hiddenness to the king, and how my great-grandmother Julia came out of her hiddenness to be able to live her life in America, where she could be safe. So we all need to come out of our hiddenness and listen to those signs that God is sending you. If you're lactose intolerant, if you're allergic to milk, if you get a lot of stomach cramps and things, that might be a sign telling you to become vegan. And this pandemic is a sign telling us all collectively to eat more plant-based food and please become vegan. Our world is crying out for help right now, and the animals are crying out for help right now, and each and every person can make a difference. Just one person can make so much of a difference in what we buy and what we cook and how we live. And we're able to practice keeping kosher through being vegan. So there's no reason not to give it a try. Thank you.
Yeah, die, da, da, die, Umi adeim let kazot higat. Umi adeim let kazot higat. Umi adeim let kazot higat. Do any of us know what the reason is that we come to our callings? I sense that Esther did not know why she was chosen, only that she was. And her reaction to the pleas of her uncle and the Jewish community to save the Jews of Shushan are not those of someone who is a plan B leader, or only a leader because there were only men around, or there were no men around who could take the job. Esther does not waver in her decision. She is reluctant at first, but once she decides that she must act, she commands, and people listen to her. She leads decisively and by example. She faces the outcome bravely, knowing that things may not go her way. And yet she acts with integrity and courage and strength. And she trusts that doing the right thing is God's plan. Umi odeim let kazot higat. The story of Esther is a powerful reminder that God can call upon all of us, you and me, anyone who is simply willing to listen, to stand for what is right. This world needs leaders who will rise up and heed the call to justice, to what is right in our society and in our world. And so I ask, could it be that you and I are called for a time such as this? As we look at the world, the environment, our food systems, inequality, discrimination, there is so much we are called to do. All we have to do is say yes. Don't let anyone tell you that you are not right for the job because of your gender identity, your age, your sexual orientation, or where you grew up. If God calls you and you stand up, That is enough. And could it be that you are called for a time such as this? I think it is that we are called for a time such as this. Umiyodea imet kazoti gat. Umiyodea imet kazoti gat. And could it be that you are called for a time such as this? I think it's clear that we are called for a time such as this. Umiyodea imet kazoti gat. Umiyodea imet kazoti gat. Umiyodea imet kazoti gat. Umiyodea imet kazoti gat. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da da, ya da da, ya da 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 da, ya ya.
So beautiful, Devorah. When you practiced the other day, you know, it gave me tears. It was just fabulous. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I especially want to thank our panelists, Devorah, Carmit, and Francis, for your wonderful contributions to our program and sharing your stories and writings. And in the case of Devorah, even writing an original song for this, that was hers. It was so beautiful. I want to thank Sarah and Jewish Veg for the wonderful ongoing partnership we share. And then I wanted to invite all of you to please follow Shemayim Jewish Animal Advocacy and Jewish Veg so that we can invite you to future events like this one. We are both really excited that we have a newly launched Come Cook With Us for Shabbat program, where we are cooking every month together with amazing chefs and cooks. Our next Come Cook With Us is with Ori Shavit, who's the award-winning Israeli author of My Vegan Kitchen, and it's on Wednesday, March 17th. So if you follow us, at noon Eastern, by the way, if you follow us, you can be invited to that event. We would love to have you join us. And a happy Purim to all. I hope you get to enjoy some delicious vegan hamantashen today. Have a great holiday.